Good to go.
Great, thank you so much. And is my screen share available for everyone? Okay, great, thank you. Good morning, thanks everyone for joining, and thank you so much for those kind words, Dr. Nasser. I really appreciate it. My name is Andrea Melrose. I currently serve as the Associate Director for Student Conduct and Academic Integrity at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. But most importantly, today I'm a doctoral student at Lindenwood in the education program. I have had the opportunity to serve in student affairs for about 20 years at 7 different institutions. And this topic has been important to me at all of those institutions, most importantly because I had an experience as a FAT student in college, and during my time serving students have connected with and related to other FAT college students. And so when it was time to really think about a topic that resonated with me, this was the one. So here we are talking about this today. I would really like to thank Dr. Nasser for helping keep me afloat and moving me through the process. Dr. Catherine and Dr. Williamson as serving on my committee and reading the book that 4 people will read. My study participants for freely giving of their time and their experiences to make this possible. My support team of family and friends, especially my mother, who over the past year kept asking me when I was going to finish that paper so I could graduate. And anyone that's expressed interest or support or paused to talk to me about this topic and my process. Part of the audience joining us today is actually a group of FAT student affairs professionals, which is a group I'm on Facebook, who have really been supportive and inspiring and have shared their experiences as well as part of this process. I start off by saying that weight-based discrimination or FAT discrimination is considered the last acceptable form of discrimination in the United States, and I'll dig into that a bit more. But we see that across society and systems, and of course that trickles down to college campuses. And so FAT students on campus are experiencing discrimination and bias, and we can do more and do better to help support them. I did want to take a moment to just discuss my use of the word fat. When I have told people that this is my topic or they've read the title, there's been reaction to the word fat, and sometimes not positive reactions. Fat is actually the preferred adjective for describing a larger body. Obese is a medical term, and overweight indicates that there's an ideal weight that people are either over or under. And that's not really appropriate or accurate either. And so fat activism and fat liberation groups have really embraced the word fat as the correct term for describing larger bodies. And again, it's just an adjective, and I will use it very freely throughout this presentation. So my big question was, how can institutions of higher education improve the undergraduate college experience for FAT students? So currently, more than 60% of the US population is overweight or obese. And by 2030, 50% of the population will fall into that obese category. So we're going to be seeing a large number of students, if we're not seeing it already, that are in larger bodies and consider themselves to be FAT students. When I went to Google to look for images for this presentation, and I put in fat students at desks, this image was one of the first ones that came up. And I thought that was really telling in thinking about the stigma and the experience of fat people in our society. So I'm going to read it for those that are listening, but it's an image that says, "Oh my God, are we having an earthquake? Overweight coworker walks by my desk." So I thought that was a very telling in terms of an artifact that describes, anti-fat bias in the United States. In 2018, studies showed that as many as 40% of US adults have been the target of weight-based teasing, unfair treatment, or discrimination. Harvard did a longitudinal study on explicit and implicit bias and found that body weight bias actually increased over 40%, where it decreased for other identity categories. And that in the United States, the belief is that being fat is a character failing, that it's something that you can't control, that fat people are lazy or irresponsible. And so often fat people are treated as second-class citizens or not quite human. And so society is unkind to fat people, but we also see that in areas of education where fat students find themselves to be potentially physically and psychologically unsafe. So in thinking about the college experience, starting with admissions, fat students are less likely, fat high school students are less likely to be encouraged to apply for college. They're less likely to receive financial support for college. They're less likely to go on to graduate school. And all things being equal, a fat student is less likely to be admitted to college in comparison with an average size student with the same qualifications. In terms of attendance and achievement, fat students experience academic interference or preoccupation with their physical appearance, fear of judgment, social anxiety that leads to absenteeism, lower grades, and energy that they could be spent on learning, spent on worrying about appearance and body size. A very salient topic was desks and desks in the academy and fat bodies not being able to fit into classroom desks. And literally and figuratively, we are telling students they don't fit here, they don't belong in that space. There have been some studies on the experiences of faculty and staff of size and their experiences in the academy. And similarly, they experience discrimination and bias, which contributes to the campus climate of fat phobia and fat discrimination. And then ultimately, fat students are less encouraged to participate in social interactions and extracurriculars, especially things like Greek life, intramural sports, cheerleading, other activities. They've been either discouraged or not included in those opportunities. In thinking about how fat has been addressed over time, initially and still today, the prevailing response to being fat is to suggest change strategies. So that would be diet, exercise, counseling, surgery, but indicating that the fat person is wrong and needs to change. And here are the ways to change. In the 60s, there was the beginning of the health at every size movement that stresses that any body could be a healthy body, and that there was a focus on movement and enjoying your body versus losing weight or being a particular size. We've seen waves of body positivity, and in fact, we're in what's considered the third wave of the body positivity movement, which is great that we're seeing more fat models, influencers, we're seeing more inclusion, but really the body positivity movement has an impact individually on how you feel about your body. It doesn't really push towards social or systemic change in response to fatness. So although we're talking about body positivity, we really want to push for a culture where it's safe to be fat. And so there is a growing movement of fat activism and fat liberation. An important part in talking about any identity is talking about intersectionality. So intersectionality takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences. It helps us understand prejudices and oppression that folks face. Intersectionality talks about how folks that may be disadvantaged by multiple identities, how that can be compounded. And we'll talk a little bit about that as it relates to fatness. The first identity I wanted to discuss is ability. This is a really controversial identity in terms of relating it to fatness. Disability activists really push for us to think about disability as the environment being the problem and changing the environment to fit and work for all people and create equity there, which would be a similar goal for fat activism and fat liberation. However, for those that see fatness as controllable, they don't want to see fatness put into the category of disability. And many fat activists don't want to embrace a double stigma of disability and fatness. But it often comes up because weight is not a protected category in the United States. It's protected in the state of Michigan, and it recently became protected in New York City. So often we rely on disability and disability accommodations to help support and protect fat people. Two other really important identities would be race and gender. I put those together in this conversation because the ideal standard of beauty in the United States is really isolated to white women who are slender and are experiencing pretty privilege. So today's ideal of thinness is both sexist and racist. So it affects women and racial minorities. And so if you have multiple identities that overlap there, you're experiencing lots of sense of privilege and disadvantage, or just disproportionate sense of privilege and disadvantage there. And then in thinking about sexual orientation, the LGBTQ plus community often find their bodies to be hypersexualized or categorized based on appearance. So fatness is an important piece of their identities as well. And those that identify as transgender experience a lot of pressure to conform to a traditional expression of gender and appearance. So again, in considering that ideal of thinness, that comes up as well as part of that intersectionality. A theory that helps frame this conversation is Nancy Schlossberg's theory on marginality and mattering. So when we think about our college students in particular, many of them have made a transition to our institutions. They're new, they want to fit in, they want to feel like they matter so that we value them. And that mattering and value translates into their participation on campus, their sense of worth and self-confidence, their sense of belonging. Students need to feel welcomed and valued and safe on campus in order to be successful and to persist and to graduate. However, students with marginalized identities have a harder time connecting and feeling valued and like they belong. If university staff tell students you belong here, but then they don't fit into the furniture, or we don't have collegiate apparel in their sizes, they're not receiving support for their needs, we're not really welcoming them in our actions. And so that marginality or that sense of not fitting in with the majority can lead students to be self-conscious, to be irritable, to be depressed, to check out, and to feel isolated, uncertain, and lonely. So it's really important to consider marginality and mattering as we consider fat students on campus, and really all students on campus. My 4 overarching research questions looked at students' experience of stigma and discrimination in college. And the first one looking at what impact that experience has had on their overall college experience, what challenges or limitations they can identify within the college environment, what support they've received around weight-based issues on campus and where that support came from, and what perceptions they have about being supported on campus as a fat student. And then also looking at the demographic factors that impact student experience on campus. So thinking about those intersecting identities and where students are finding belonging and support for their fat bodies and for their needs around being a fat college student. My methodology, as Dr. Nasser mentioned, was to start with convenience sampling. So I created a survey and circulated that information to my network, many who are on this call today, via email and social media, because through that convenience sampling, it was the easiest way for me to connect and get information. And then I asked those folks to pass on this information. So the snowball sampling of asking them to post it on their social media, circulate it with their student populations, and that's how I collected participants. The survey design included qualifying questions. So to qualify for the study, students needed to be 18 to 25 years old, either currently enrolled as a graduate student or they had recently graduated within the last 3 years, and they were attending or attended college in the United States, and then they self-identified as fat. I had 89 people respond to the survey. 18 of those qualified and moved forward and completed a full data set that included demographic questions and exploratory questions. Of those 18, 17 provided emails saying they would be willing to be interviewed. And of those, 6 responded and were available, and we completed 16 question interviews that were recorded. A limitation to this process was the global pandemic, and about 40% of my participants identified themselves as either first year, sophomore, or junior students, indicating that they hadn't been on campus much, if at all, during the global pandemic. And I think that had an impact on some of their responses regarding their experiences on campus, because they really hadn't had the opportunity to physically be on campus. I mentioned that the participants self-identified as fat. I did that because rather than disclosing BMI or asking students to share their height and weight, BMI is not an accurate measure or representation of weight or healthiness. And so it was important for me to share with the participants this definition on the chart on your right and ask them to self-identify based on size. And then I also asked in the survey why they perceived themselves as fat, and so gathered information from the participants themselves about their concepts of their body. I took that data and I themed for patterns. So looking for patterns in the survey data, I coded each participant with a letter and looked through the data for trends and patterns. And then similarly did the same thing with the interview data. All 6 participants were assigned a color, and then I looked through all of their responses to find themes and information that related back to the research questions. I will say that there were no patterns in terms of socioeconomic status, geographic location, or institution type and size. So those factors did not pull up any trends. But let's go ahead and take just a closer look at some of those results. For research question 1 around how have students experienced weight-based stigma and discrimination at college, I found that most fat college students have experienced discrimination. In fact, 94% of the participants responded that they had experienced weight-based discrimination in college. Theme 2 was, where is that happening? And it happens everywhere on campus. So it happens in the classroom, the health center, the recreation center, the dining hall, the residence hall, extracurricular activities. So it's happening in and out of the classroom. Theme 3 focused on weight-based discrimination, and I found that the students indicated that their experience of discrimination did not impact their overall college experience. In fact, they described their overall experiences as ranging from okay to fantastic. And they attributed those positive experiences to their college friend group.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the frequency of fat discrimination, fat students on college campuses experience discrimination approximately 12 times during the academic year. So that's more than once a month that they're experiencing some kind of stigma or discrimination based on their weight. 50% of all the survey participants stated that they experience weight discrimination at least 2 to 3 times a semester. So that's about once a month for that group. And 28% of participants reported experiencing discrimination on a weekly basis. Question 2 asked how students have been challenged and what limitations they have within the college environment. 83% of survey participants mentioned some concern about the physical campus environment. So the largest topic was inadequate classroom seating. So participants described campus seating as small, uncomfortable, hard to get in and out of, and noisy. And that the students said they would struggle to focus on learning because they were uncomfortable in the classroom seats. The second theme was really the other spaces, bed, bath, and beyond, that students also found themselves to be uncomfortable or not included in design. So survey participant E stated that booths in the dining hall are small. Some chairs on the campus don't feel sturdy enough to support my weight. My dorm bed was rickety for me to climb. My clothes are bigger and I couldn't fit as many clothes in the given furniture in the dorm room, like the dresser or the wardrobe. The showers were so small that I could hardly shave and the shower curtain always touched me. The bathroom stalls were way too narrow. Desks were often uncomfortable if they didn't adjust to my size. Research question 3 asks what kind of support students are receiving around those challenges and limitations, and what perceptions the participants had around those resources. So theme 1 was that most fat college students cannot name a campus resource that supports their weight-based needs. 56% of survey participants could not name any weight-based resources. And those that identified support, it was around that change support. So counseling, nutritionists, exercise routine at the gym. It was not around supporting the fat body as it is. It was around changing that body to fit in the environment. Fat students also shared that they have not asked for any support or accommodations from university employees. When asked how they've navigated weight-related challenges, survey participant J stated, I've dealt with these challenges before attending college and learned to adapt my lifestyle around weight. In one of the interviews, I asked participant Green why, if they had accessed any accommodations, and they shared, I haven't, just because I feel like those are for people with documented accommodation needs. Whereas I don't necessarily see myself as needing to, because I can fit in those spaces. It's just really uncomfortable for me. And I know it's not shameful, but in my head, it's shameful to ask for accommodations. Question 3 was about also asked what students need in terms of support, what they would like to see happen if they're not receiving weight-based support on campus. And the 2 things that came out of that was that fat college students want to see more peer-to-peer college support, or peer-to-peer support in college. They talked about wanting a student group or organization that provided campus education, that would put on body positive events, that would advocate for things on campus for fat students. Interview participant Green said, it's important for people to be able to have that support system. In my experience, a lot of people didn't have that support growing up and typically felt like they were outgrouped because of their size. So being able to have those connections with other people who understand you is so important. The other thing we looked at was are they getting support from faculty and staff and the college as a whole? And they stated that they weren't, and that they would want faculty and staff to know that they are experiencing these challenges. They want faculty and staff to have an awareness of fat phobia and discrimination, that we're moving the campus towards acceptance and celebration of all bodies. Interview participant Yellow stated, I think adding more resources to campus would just be more education on how you can't always control your size. I think ableism is a problem. They always tell you to lose weight, and it's very frustrating and dehumanizing. And then looking at that last research question around demographics, intersectionality, and identity, the biggest intersection of identities in my study was between fat and women identified folk. So I had 14 survey participants and all 6 of my interview participants that identified as women. Participant Teal stated that there's more of a pressure as a woman to fit physical ideal body type expectations. They shared, I know my gender is very salient when it comes to appearance and expectations of what that looks like has been put on me. But what I'm supposed to look like is not what I look like. I am not the quote unquote ideal woman. Theme 2 looked at the intersection of fat and LGBTQ, and 67% of my interview participants identified as LGBTQ+. Interview participant Green stated that queer identities have a tendency to be hypersexualized, and found that their bodies were critiqued more, and that they had more difficulty dating in regards to that. So my interpretations of that data and that information is that fat college students do not believe that fat discrimination has affected their overall college experience. But I think that while fat is hyper visible, it's often ignored, and the fat student is left to figure out how to navigate campus and create their own accommodations. For most fat college students, they were fat before they went to college, so they've already learned through the messaging of society that their bodies are wrong and they need to change or they need to adapt. And so they bring that idea into college with them. And so they're not asking for help. They're not asking for accommodations. They're not expecting the environment to be welcoming to them. And they have this internalized oppression around that fat identity that they're bringing with them. So the support fat students receive around their fatness is in the form of change strategies. It's a continuation of that messaging that your body is wrong and you need to change. And here are the ways we'll help you change. And so ultimately, college is not inclusive of fat bodies or supportive of fat students, despite, wanting the college environment to fit them better. Our fat students are also not advocating for those changes, again, because of some of that societal messaging and an internalized oppression. In terms of recommendations and things that I hope folks are able to bring back to their campuses or their practices is looking at question 1 in that discrimination piece, working to make weight a protected category in employment and enrollment practices on campus. So until that becomes a state or federal law, a protection law, what can we do to make that protected on campus? Training key faculty and staff who are doing particularly hiring and enrollment on fat bias and discrimination, and then charging our offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion with recognizing fat people as a marginalized group and as a group that they should be working to support, and also work to shifting the campus community's response to fat students. Research question 2 focused on those limitations. So how do we remove those obstacles and limitations for students, particularly in the physical environment? We need to think about our furniture, our equipment. I had a student in the interview who said they wanted to go to the rec center and use the climbing wall, and there was no climbing equipment in their size, so they couldn't use it. They didn't go report that to anyone. They just left and knew that they couldn't use the climbing wall. Why are we not providing equipment for students of all sizes? Thinking about campus, sending folks on campus tours or up and down buildings with multiple flights of stairs. Campus transportation, students were reporting that they were using Uber to get around campus or other things, again, accommodating for themselves. Providing campus activities that students can participate in. Students mentioned not being able to go to amusement park activities because they don't fit on the rides, or ice skating or other things that were not inclusive to them and their bodies. And again, thinking about clothing. One interview participant stated that they needed a size 2X, and when they went to an event, the t-shirts only went up to a size large. And they were sent on their way with no t-shirt. So again, maybe we can get rid of having t-shirts as the giveaway, or we can, be more inclusive in our sizing, including in our campus bookstores. Research question 3 looked at support, and as I heard from the students, they would love to see a group or create a group on body diversity and fat liberation, so that they have peer-to-peer support. And they also, as I just discussed, talked about inclusive programming and activities. The spaces that were mentioned the most was new student programs, Greek life, residence life, health and counseling services, the rec center, and student organizations. What I realized, and if I could go back in time and do this again, as I mentioned, I realized that fat students have learned to hide or minimize their challenges prior to college. So they've already adapted, and they don't recognize their experience in college as being negative. It's really a continuation of what they've already experienced. I wish I had asked instead, what behaviors they had learned to adapt to the quote unquote normal size student experience. And instead of asking them if they sought accommodations, I would have asked, have you confided in any university faculty or staff regarding your size or weight related issues? Because when they heard accommodations, they immediately thought of disability accommodations. And that wasn't exactly what I was trying to get to. So I would ask these questions instead. My recommendations for future research is to include body identity as part of identity development and college student identity development. We think of all the other pieces of identity and how those intersect, but we experience the world through our bodies. And we don't talk about that. And we don't talk about how fat identity has an impact on our experiences and our experiences as college students. So future research that I would suggest is moving towards a fat identity development model, and really moving towards body diversity as an important part of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Overall, student recruitment, retention, and satisfaction will increase if we take steps to make campus more equitable, inclusive of fat people. And that'll really impact all of our students. Comfortable desks will be great for everyone, not just fat students. Having more inclusive programming, having a wider selection of clothing or other things really only benefits all of our students. So moving towards creating a campus culture and making our campuses better for fat people is something we should be doing and something that we should be talking about and actively moving towards. And that was my study. Thank you so much, all of you that jumped on. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have such a wonderful community.
Thank you, Andrea. I really enjoyed that. For our audience, I would like to remind you that this is an academic process. So we're going to have a question and answer session with Andrea and her committee and Lindenwood University professors. So you're welcome to listen, but the discussion is a part of that academic piece. So questions for Andrea?
Yeah, I have 100 questions, but I'll just ask one here. Did you, in your research, or even in, so if your literature review or even in your interviews, did you find anybody any college or administration or department that's getting this right or moving in the right direction based on what you heard? I'm curious.
Hey, Caleb.
I did not.
Let's just go. We'll listen in the car.
I did not receive any information from colleges that were doing it right. Certainly a lot of folks that were not doing it right. One example was Lincoln University that required students, if they had a 30 or higher BMI, to take a fitness for life class in order to be able to graduate. So really the opposite of accepting large bodies. I did not hear from anyone about positive things that institutions were doing.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrea. First of all, really, really fascinating study.
Thank you so much.
I was curious, were you surprised at the finding that
I'm so sorry, everything got muted for me on my end.
Yeah, I just suddenly saw myself muted as well. So, okay, I don't know how much you actually heard, but I'm curious as to whether or not you were surprised. It was theme 3. I can't remember if it was research question 1 or 2, but it showed that the difficulties and challenges really did not affect their college experience. For me, that was surprising. Didn't know if that was a surprise to you or how that fit with some of the research that you had done.
Right. Thank you. Yes, that was a huge surprise to me. I went in thinking, oh, these college students are going to be able to identify that this has had an impact, especially with the high frequency that they reported experiencing. And then I thought back to my time in college as a fat student. And I would say, if someone asked me, I would say, overall, I had a good experience. I had great classes. I learned a lot. I had friends. I was involved, all of those things. but I could distinctly remember experiences of discrimination or being excluded based on my size and my body. And I think what I went back to in thinking about the research is that fat people experience discrimination from the time they're very young. We receive messaging from our parents who are in some ways afraid for us as fat people because they know the discrimination we're going to receive. We receive messaging in grade school. There's a lot of examples of grade school teachers who, in the effort to try and support weight loss or weight change, target students that, give them stickers for losing weight, or, celebrate them eating a healthy snack, or, other things. So we fat people receive these messages very early, and we internalize that stigma and that oppression, and we think we're wrong. We don't belong and we're wrong. And so when we get to college, we've already made adjustments to either hide that or adapt. And so I think we've also learned to compartmentalize that experience of fat discrimination and oppression and see that as separate from our overall college experience. But there were certainly examples in my interviews of folks that felt very targeted in the classroom, were pulled to the front of the room to be, let's show everyone how to take blood pressure on a fat body. Or let's show we're talking about health and diets. Everyone looked at this person and asked them to talk, what are you doing to improve your body? And those things are happening in the classroom. So, even though students could tell me those stories, they still said they were having a good experience overall in college. And I think it's because we become desensitized, and we've been told that our bodies are wrong. And so we just put that to the side. But I was surprised.
Thank you again. Really a wonderful job.
Thank you so much.
I have another question.
Of course you do.
I'm sorry. I said I would ask one. I'm asking two. When you talk about addressing student organizations, and you mentioned Greek life, I started reflecting on, when I go back to my administrative days, I felt I had more direct oversight. I don't know if you want to use the word control over student organizations, like the anime club or something like that, where I could maybe encourage them after seeing this presentation. I could encourage them to be open to all membership. They may already be doing that. Greek life, on the other hand, is more of a selective, and in some cases, almost like a lateral side of student involvement. Where do you start there to direct change?
I would start with the Greek life advisors. I think that's a really important place to start with information and training. I had an opportunity last week at the national conference on race and ethnicity to provide a poster presentation on my research, and I was actually approached by someone that advises a sorority and was involved in Greek life, and they asked me, well, what can I do? And I talked about body positive programming, advocacy. We started talking about ideas for activities that they could do with their sorority, and she was very excited and said, I said, you could have the students write a letter to their body, thanking their body for all the things it's able to do. We spend so much time internally telling the things we don't like about our bodies or criticizing our bodies, but you could do that kind of activity where we're celebrating our bodies. And she was like, that's great. Took my card, said, we're going to talk, we're going to do more. But I think starting with the advisors is really important. And then, as someone that has also advised Greek life and done training for student leaders in Greek organizations, and also having training required, which I know that we do at UMSL, it could be incorporated into the training that the student leaders are receiving in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating welcoming spaces for all students.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea, I had a question. I apologize. My Zoom kicked me out there for a second. So if it was asked while I was removed, just say it was already addressed. You had said you had 89 folks who replied to your interest,
Yes,
but then only 18 met all the qualifications. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So can you just share briefly what were some of the main reasons that they didn't qualify?
Sure. Or should I just tell you, Dr. Williamson, I already answered that. I'm just kidding.
You're
I'm
good.
just kidding. So some of them just didn't meet those 5 qualifiers. So they weren't in the age range of 18 to 25. They didn't attend college in the United States. They weren't either currently enrolled or graduated within 3 years. And then other folks, this may not surprise my other student affairs professionals, responded with jokes. Would respond to the open-ended questions with, I'm a fat boy, send me more pizza, or, things like that. So we had folks that did not take the survey seriously. There was always an option in both the survey and the interview. If a participant was uncomfortable, they could always stop out and time out and not finish it. So there were certainly people that answered part of it and then stopped out. So I certainly wished that I had more, and I actually had to I did an initial request and did not come up with a lot of participants, and then did a secondary request and came up with what I thought was enough information to be able to draw reasonable conclusions. But I think also doing this work during the pandemic was very difficult to get any kind of participation. And so I think that was certainly a challenge that I didn't really expect. I thought, oh, fat people are going to want to tell me they've experienced all these things. They're going to be excited to tell me all of this. But I think, there were just some challenges in terms of getting participation.
So I have a question too, Andrea.
Sure.
And it goes back to the pandemic thing, because I was thinking, I really appreciate that you thought through how you would rephrase some of those questions, given the opportunity to maybe do this again, and thinking about the pandemic and those limitations and reframing those questions. What else do you think you might do different to maybe have more participants or have a broader viewpoint?
Sure. I think also one of the limitations during the pandemic was that I wasn't physically on campus. So it wasn't easy or accessible for me to speak to students about it, or go to a student organization and say, hey, if anybody, here's a QR code, if anyone could do this. So using my relationships was very difficult because I also wasn't physically on campus. And I think if we weren't in that time, that I would have had a little more traction in person to person requests for participation. And I also think when you were asking that, I was like, oh, I wonder, again, another question, if these students were only taking online classes or were virtual during the pandemic, I wonder if some questions for them would be around whether or not they turn their cameras on during classes or during interactions, or whether that academic interference also trickled over into their experience of online classes.
Any other questions for Andrea at this time? Okay.
May I?
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. This has given, if I'm quiet, it's because you've given me so much to think about, and I'm just running through my day and my week and my students and my colleagues and thinking, how can I make this more body positive? How can I make this more inclusive? Because, for example, right now I have a student who's from France and he's a basketball player, so he's very tall. and it's uncomfortable to sit at a chair that is not made for tall people, and it's uncomfortable to be at a table. I was already thinking about that. And so just being able to partner and collaborate with other departments and just having things like this at the ready to make everything comfortable and inclusive. Yeah. Yeah, this has given me so much. I'm so excited to take this back to leadership and to my network and just brainstorm and think about things that we can do. But any ideas and recommendations that you have, I'm an open container.
Thanks,
Congrats.
Erin. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And what you are pointing out is correct. So although I focused on fat bodies, some of these changes would tall, short, left-handed, some of the research that was done on desks were that a lot of our desks aren't comfortable for average size bodies, let alone someone that may not fit that description. So the more that we can do to be inclusive of fat bodies, I think will also be good for all students.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Dr. French.
Congratulations on such a fantastic research project. This was so amazing to learn more about, and I can't wait to see how the impact on the field unfolds from here. I loved that you started in your introduction with sharing how you came to this topic, and I'm wondering what you are personally taking away.
Oh, I think, and this is something I've probably developed over the last 10 years, but I think what I've taken away is how important it is for me to be transparent about my experiences as a fat person with our students who also identify as fat. It gives them not just permission, but validation. It gives them an opportunity to share with me that they share that identity and they share those challenges and they feel validated and listened to. And so I've gotten feedback from students around that concern and feeling like that's important for them. I also had the opportunity this past semester to teach a socially just leadership class, and body diversity was one of the topics that my students worked on. And it was something that was for many of them things that they had experienced but had not thought about in terms of being an oppressed or marginalized group and what that looked like for them, and what change agents actions and things that they could be empowered to take on campus and into their lives. So I think for me, it's taking that and my experience, sharing it with students and empowering them to embrace it and advocate.
Thank you. Great work.
Thank you.
Anyone else waiting to speak here? Okay.
I just have to say, I feel so moved and so proud I've seen you through this process from afar. I could cry. Like, I'm so proud of you. And thank you for making me a better professional.
Thank you. Thanks for all the love.
Okay, I'm going to move the committee into the waiting room, and Andrea will join you shortly.
Great, thank you so much.